Most important thing that we're going to do in this unit is teach you how to use planning schemes. This is the bulk of graduate work as a stat planner, is being able to match a development to a planning scheme. So I'll give you an introduction to how planning schemes are set up and then separately record a more detailed look at planning schemes and a workshop about how to apply a planning scheme and actually bring all of this to life. So if you think about applying for a development, whether that's perhaps an extension on your house, and think through these steps in the case of a real life example, if you can, just to try to make this make sense a little bit. I know this text is quite small, but I'm going to whip through it. So you work through these in order just to make sure that you're headed down the right direction and not crashing into the middle. So we do need to look at whether you need a permit under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act, whether the activity might be exempt and how it might be exempt, before then going in to look at the location, the zone, what type of thing you're trying to do. So classifying its use is a really important part of this step. And then looking at the status of the uses in that zone. Is this a permitted use, discretionary use, prohibited use? There's no use applying for permission to do something that's prohibited in a zone. What else can we tell from the map as to what's there, and is there anything particular about this particular area that we might need to take notice of? So there is a bit of a flow chart. This might feel a little strange to start with, but it's something that you quite quickly get used to when you're actually working through examples. So planning schemes, incredibly important statutory implement or control, and they are basically the rules, or the document that either facilitates or prohibits certain activities in certain areas. So this is all done through land use planning and approvals, and at each council level, it's the planning scheme that is the primary planning instrument. And it's about thinking through either changing the use, doing a development, maybe subdividing land is the main ways in which people will want to encounter the planning system. And unless something doesn't have a permit required or is prohibited, then you'll be looking at getting a permit and going through this process, and then potentially getting conditions on that permit. Anyway, we'll get to that down the track. And so what's actually at the location, the controls that location, is really important. So we'll look at how this works in terms of the actual planning scheme, but all of these things are important, that you know the zone, you know the overlay, there isn't anything odd about the area. And then in terms of the particular thing that you're trying to do there, what is standard and what needs to be negotiated is basically what that last dot point is. So in Tassie, this is how the Tasmanian planning scheme is set up. It changed a couple of years ago to try to bring some consistencies to what was 31 planning schemes. So some local government areas had more than one planning scheme, 29 local councils. So now there are state planning provisions that basically set up a template that everybody works off. You'll notice that some are still in the interim state where they don't have that bottom half just yet. They've gone to kind of the stepping stone under the Tasmanian planning system, but they haven't got all of the planning sorted out for their particular area. So, but the state planning provisions set the template, and then in each local government area, then you'll see the zones, the codes, all of the details. Particular purpose zone is interesting because I'm sitting in a particular purpose zone, which is the Sandy Bay campus, a university area. So all of this bottom part is what you are dealing with and what you have already seen in the list in terms of some of the controls. So this is from the City of Hobart page. You can see down the bottom it says the Tasmanian Planning Scheme will replace the interim planning scheme and the Sullivan Cove planning scheme when it finally gets through. I'm not quite sure where Hobart is, but yeah, some councils have finished, Hobart is not. So this is what they look like. You should be familiar with this from iPlan. And so a big part of what you do in this unit is get used to finding the relevant planning scheme and then opening and closing the pages to reveal all the child pages at the crosses. And that's where all the detail is. That's where you need to learn where to go and how to understand the wording and what that's directing the planning to do in terms of that particular location. So you can see that the structure has these different parts, the overall purpose and objectives. There's a whole bunch of administration under Part B that you won't tend to be opening day to day. Really what you need to be focusing on, particularly if you're new to this, is the zones and codes, because you won't have a lot of cause to delve into the rest. So you should be familiar with zones by now. I have 22 Waterloo Crescent highlighted here as a location of interest. And I know this is very small, but this is an inner residential zone. And you can see that there are various other business open space zones around it, but the particular zone that applies to 22 Waterloo Crescent is inner residential. So in the planning scheme, you go to that area and open it up to find all the detail that will direct you further. So the other thing just to note is that you can actually go to the end of the planning scheme and open up the list within there, and it already has those layers turned on. So if you go down to the planning scheme maps, go to the zoning map, it might take a little while to load, but instead of having to go to the list and turn on the layers are already on. So I've just got a screenshot there to show you what happens when you reveal the child pages under planning scheme. So it has a little cross, click on that and it will reveal the child pages, and you'll see one of them is zoning map, and you can navigate around as if you were in the list. So codes, we've spoken about codes, sometimes called overlays. It depends a little bit where you are, but they're kind of used interchangeably in Tassie. And here's one of the heritage, this is a local heritage code. And you might recognise this because there's a big white chunk here that is the particular purpose zone of the Sandy Bay campus. And to the north of that, you'll see lots of green because there's local heritage precincts, local heritage places. There are some significant trees, quite a lot of green, which you would expect in this oldest part of Hobart, that is Battery Point and the inner part of Hobart. So you can find all these maps. This was in the City of Hobart webpage, but you can, the easiest thing to do is to learn how to move around the list, and then you can just turn things on and off rather than having this static resource to deal with. So this bears mentioning because this is where we have lectures in the particular purpose zone that is PPZ3, University of Tasmania Sandy Bay campus. So yeah, just to be aware that this is a good example of a particular purpose zone. You won't have a lot of cause to need that, but just so you know. Okay, so this is what it looks like when you reveal the child pages under zones, and I've got the background shot here with text that's probably a little bit too small to read, but I tried to show the two windows here. There's the menu side window which you use to open and close the pages to get the details. So here I've got, this is about privacy for a single dwelling. This is something that comes up quite a bit in planning debates, people fighting to retain their privacy when their neighbours are building something. And so you can see there that I've clicked on Part D zones to reveal on this. I've clicked on inner residential zone because that's the zone that we're dealing with in the case of Waterloo Crescent. And then I've gone down to standards for dwellings, which is 11.4, and at 11.4.6, it's about privacy for a dwelling. So this is a little bit of a treasure hunt at first until you get used to the scheme. But when you do start working as a stat planner, you know, after some months, after 6 months, you'll know your own planning scheme really well. If you're working as a consultant planner, then you'll generally be hopping between planning schemes, but this is where a standardized system has made planners work a whole lot easier. So yeah, you unhide all the detail to see what's there. And so this is where, working through a particular case, you need to know which zone it is, what's being proposed, and then go to the detail. So it's a matter of looking at the definitions, seeing what applies, and then going into the detail to figure out whether what you're looking at, in the case of perhaps a big shed in somebody's backyard, what's it classified as? What are the acceptable solutions for that? Does this fit? If it doesn't fit, how is this going to be tackled? So it's a matching game. So under 11.4, this is what you see. So this is the bit that you couldn't see before that I've now revealed, privacy for dwellings. So the objective here is to make sure that even if your neighbour is developing, that there are some controls over your privacy. So under the acceptable solutions, if the development fits within these specifications, it's 2 thumbs up. So if you're, there's all of these conditions, and you'll see that there's numbers here. So it's really very certain whether you're fitting this acceptable solution or you're not, because you can measure it. And even if you're a tiny bit outside the acceptable solution, then you need to go to P1 instead of A1. And if it doesn't fit, it triggers a discussion. So this is where you move from a development that maybe fits nice and neatly within the planning scheme. It's possibly doesn't need to be advertised, all incredibly simple, go ahead, to one where maybe there's privacy problems, maybe the building's too tall, maybe it's too close to the boundaries. And if so, then you move from acceptable solutions into the performance criteria. And that's when there starts up this discussion, because as you can see, under the performance criteria, there's certain words that become really important and possibly debated. So in this case, whatever it is, the balcony, the deck, the carport for the dwelling, that has these criteria, that is not trivial, that has a finished surface or floor level more than 1 metre above the ground, it needs to minimise overlooking. And so this is where the wording and interpretation is really important. So what does it mean to minimise the overlooking, and what is okay in this case? This is where planning expertise comes into it. So the performance criteria will end up being a discussion between the developer and the planner, and in this case, possibly the neighbours too, to try to make sure that the best possible outcome is achieved. So the acceptable solution is that the dwelling just complies, all good, and the performance criteria triggers a discretion. And so you'll see when working through 22 Waterloo Crescent, that there are 3 discretions that are triggered, and this is where you need to start making decisions about how to adapt, given that it's not a standard. So in this case, what does minimise actually look like in terms of changing the plans or accepting a solution? So this has been a quick introduction to looking at planning schemes. There's a separate video that has a more detailed look at all the different parts of a planning scheme before we go in and actually have a go at doing this.